why are our bodies so resistant to getting like super lean?
Approach is like, hey, I'm going to use like clenbuterol, you're going to eat less, and you're going to move more. It's like all three of those things are going to add more oxidative stress.
Is there a lot of cardio training in there?
I'm almost never doing cardio for cardio's sake. Every girl is like, when they want to hop on an androgen, they're like, oh, I heard I should do anabars. Well, let's do that. I think you're really stepping over dollars to pick up pennies with that.
What are some supplements that you guys feel are actually effective?
Creatine monohydrate.
Creatine's an awesome one. Like,
what does the carnitine and choline do?
We're kind of steering the body to want to utilize fatty acids more. I think it's really easy to get hyper-focused on the calories in, calories out. If we're doing this right, there might not be a dramatic change on the scale.
You're always making amazing food. A lot of times when I see your Instagram, I can't watch that and like diet at the same time. Even though the stuff you're making is healthy.
She's a pro at it.
I know.
I like
the Ninja Creamy.
I eat so little that I really have to enjoy the food that I do eat.
Yeah, it has to take you 4 hours to prepare it.
Yeah.
What's the deal with the Ninja Creamy? It seems like you got obsessed with that thing.
Oh, I am obsessed with it. And do you have one?
I do have one, and I try to tell people about it.
Right?
What's that?
You probably understand why.
Oh no, I totally understand. The Ninja Creamy is amazing.
Keto Pro makes the creamy really good.
Amazing.
Yeah, all my keto recipes are using your Keto Pro, and it's just it's a game changer.
Were you able to eat ice cream all the way through your prep?
I was.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I feel kind of guilty. Like I don't even know the struggles of bodybuilding, really.
Yeah, you don't know what people went through for years and years until
Back
the
in
Ninja
the 90s,
Creamy.
when they were just mixing like a tablespoon of water with protein powder and calling it pudding.
Yeah, Metrex that would break your blender. Literally, your blender would be like pissed. Like you would go through blenders because your blender would like start to smoke.
Oh yeah,
it was so hard to mix that original like Metrex formula. It was wild.
Yeah, I'm happy I didn't have to see those days.
Yeah.
You actually take like a little bit of coffee, do a little bit of do you use the chocolate Keto Pro?
Yeah.
And then a little bit of the True Nutrition coffee caramel macchiato.
And some espresso powder.
That's good.
Oh, you guys are like scientists over here.
No, it's her. I just
scientist.
I'm like, what is this? She's like, well, I made it. I'm like, wow, it's good.
Tell us a little bit about the creatine workout. Last time you were here, you guys talked about it a little bit. We had Andy Triana, Superbrain. We had him on. We had Joe Sullivan on as well as yourself. And you guys dove into some of that. But I think it's worth reiterating. I think that sometimes these things take a long time for people to adopt. But that felt amazing, even though we didn't work out that hard. We didn't work out very long, but it felt really good.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of cool things about creatine work, and it depends on, how you want to utilize it. But I mean, like, I think just about every athlete that I have has some kind of creatine work, and like a lot of times you kind of use it as this kind of like anti-aging or like keeping athleticism. And like I was telling you about it, like with the effects of the brain, like the brain's going to use creatine, it's going to use glucose as its like source of recycling ATP. And so whenever I'm thinking about things inside of like an energy system or like with someone's workout, it's like they have ATP, they're going to use it. Who is going to replace those phosphate bonds that get broken off the ATP? It's pretty simple. It's like you do something like you use your brain, you use a muscle, phosphate bond's going to break off, provides the energy, calcium flies across into the neurons, it contracts, whatever. But who replaces that phosphate bond is pretty important. So we do a lot of creatine work, like what we just did, to just upregulate you're just basically pushing out a whole bunch of creatine kinase into your bloodstream. And by doing that, you upregulate the amount of creatine phosphate that you're able to store. And the more creatine phosphate that you can store, you kind of get this like large bandwidth of creatine phosphates. And it's going to shorten the amount of glucose that you're going to need until you start getting into the fatty acids too. And that's going to lower the amount of oxidative stress. Because really like the more, glucose you're going to use, the more oxidative stress. If we can use more creatine, we're going to keep our brains. Like Andy Triana, Go Superbrain, he always makes the joke, like if you're doing creatine work in your 30s, then you're going to keep cognitive decline away in your 40s.
Yeah, I just find it that kind of work. I've been doing some stuff like that. I've been doing some jumps and I've been doing some sprints and I've been doing more things that are a little bit similar to what we did today. But I just think that something I'm obsessed with is like, how do I give people these like short messages that they could easily go and do? And so a creatine workout for people that may have been confused by some of the biology that you went into, it's just explosive work. It's just some short bouts of explosive activity. And you could do this any which way you want. You could do this on a walk. I'll frequently do that on a walk. You might do some jumps or some bounds or some sprints. The main thing is you just want a certain rest interval in between so that you're not getting yourself like exhausted, right?
Yeah, and you don't want it to be, so like we were mentioning before, so instead of like 2 or 3 sets of like 10 to 12, it's like 10 or 12 sets of 2 to 3, right? And you want the rest time to be long enough that you're not getting kind of like lactic buildup. Like you don't want to be able to feel, you know, all that lactic acid building up. But you don't want it to be so long that it becomes, you know, oxidative too, where it's just you start using fatty acids to replenish your ATP.
How were you able to prep her for her show? Because like that's probably really difficult to coach. You know, to coach just an athlete that you communicate with that you don't hardly know, but to coach your own wife, to coach somebody that's in your own home, is probably has its own challenges. And then we hear a lot of times that when somebody is dieting for a show, that you know, the calories get taken away and they get to be moody and stuff like that. So how did some of that work out or not work out?
You know, we actually had, I feel like we had a pretty good relationship.
Really good dynamic.
Yeah, like coach-athlete relationship. She was really good at just like, hey, this is the plan. I would come up with a plan. This is why we're doing it. And she was really good at adhering to it. So as far as that went, I don't think we really had any kind of like issues there. She was just so good at like, hey, like you have a reason for it. For whatever reason that was, like just really trusted me pretty blindly with it. Maybe it's like, you know, just working with all the athletes I did or whatever, but no, she just always trusted it, always gave me good feedback on it, on how to adapt. And we always managed that pretty well.
Do you think that women maybe follow coaching advice maybe a little differently than men?
Yeah. So in my experience with working with men and women, women are easier. Women are definitely easier to work with. They're more...
they follow what's like written out and they follow very specifically. Yeah.
And I always have like check-ins for my athletes where, you know, it's like, hey, you know, every week or every even day sometimes, I need you to fill these things in. Did you do this? Did you not do this? And here's like a little journal entry, you know, and all the women, they come in and there's like lots written up and
they write a story for their journal entry.
Yeah. And everything's filled in. Like
you can't get anything from them.
Yeah. Just very meticulously filled out.
Do those warm-ups that I wrote down for you? Like you've been doing those and they're like silence, like
yeah.
You get nothing back.
Yeah. The men, you come into their sheet and it's like, shit, text them, what's going on? Like, yeah, it's definitely different. So it's not always that way. Like there are some times where there's, you know, guys that are very good at following the plan too and filling out all their stuff, giving good feedback. But it does seem to go that way sometimes.
Why are our bodies so resistant to getting like super lean? Like sometimes it seems like, you know, you put someone on a plan and you just say, here, eat these calories, but it's not that simple. As you get closer to a show, like there's a lot of like adding in or taking out of certain things. And I don't know if we like know why all these things happen, but you'll hear some coaches say to take out cheese or fruit, or they have these different theories. I heard somebody recently saying a cold plunge could help someone kind of dial in that kind of hardness that they're looking for if they're holding some water. I heard you kind of mentioning the creatine works pretty good with bodybuilders, kind of get them that dry look. What do you think is kind of behind some of this? You're trying to get lean, but there's like the body just doesn't want to respond to it sometimes.
No, yeah, I think there's could be a lot of varying factors in that. Like I think being able to manage somebody's just total accumulative oxidative stress at 1.2 really has a big effect of it. So like, you know, for a lot of people, when their coach is trying to get them leaner, the approach is like, hey, I'm going to use like clenbuterol, you're going to eat less, and you're going to move more. You know, it's like all three of those things are going to add more oxidative stress, right? And you always have this balance of basically like oxidative stress, like total accumulative stress, and then things to be able to manage that, which let's say is like antioxidants or whatever. If you start to tip that scale too far where you can't manage it, your brain is absolutely not going to, you know, it's not going to be as likely to fire neurotransmitters. You're not going to be able to replenish them. You're not going to, you know, there's a lot of things that it will start to inhibit doing. And so a big part of that to me is like, hey, we got to be able to manage things. Like, yeah, it's like if you have 3 pounds of like fat to lose or whatever, or 10 pounds or whatever, it's great, but like we have to do it in a way that's not going to cause so much oxidative stress that you cannot manage it, or you're going to stop. Like,
do you guys think like that's one of the reasons why sometimes after a show someone has a pretty big rebound?
Yeah. I think that probably has a lot to do with it, and just being so depleted and so hungry that like psychologically they have to go binge eat to deal with that.
Did you have any issues with that after your show? Or were you like too aware of it maybe for it to mess with you?
I think I worried about it so hard that I almost got myself out of it a little bit, to an extent. I mean, I definitely dilly-dallied around a little too much after my show, but I don't think I let it get too out of control because throughout my whole show, that was kind of my biggest stress is like, oh, am I going to balloon up after this? I try to just view my show. I try to view the process as being like 2 weeks after my show. That's the actual finish line. And then giving myself that 2-week buffer to kind of like re-regulate a little bit and be very meticulous with my diet. So I think that helped a lot.
Did you gain like a lot of weight, or was there a certain weight that you were like, hey, I don't want to go over this?
Well, I just want to grow, or I really want to be a lot bigger. I mean, I was on stage at about 160. Not quite 160, and I really want to be on stage more conditioned than I was, but at 165. So when I see the number on the scale go up, I'm like, oh, hey, look at that. Like right now I'm walking out around about 180, so 20 pounds above my stage weight. You
ain't a lady unless you're 180, I heard.
I need to get that on a t-shirt somewhere. Yeah. That's amazing.
That's what I was saying. That's what I heard. But for myself, when I competed, it was like, hey, I think it's reasonable to, at my body weight, percentage of my body weight, I think it's okay for me to gain about 20 pounds. And so I was like, a month from the show, it's okay if I'm about 20 pounds over. But like 2 months from the show, I want to be around 10 pounds over, to kind of stabilize. And I was able to do that. But luckily, I had people around me that I can communicate with that already knew about these rebounds. And they were like, warning me of it. And they also said, you're a former fat guy. You were 330 pounds.
Gotta be more careful.
So yeah, you got to be even more careful. But to look at it from the gains perspective is actually kind of neat, because you can say, I mean, as long as you don't get too carried away with that, I'm here for the gains, and you're eating French fries all the time.
Mass moves mass.
Did you change your training up a little bit too at that time?
A little bit. I mean, the week after the show, training is kind of very boring. And that's like the week I tend to want to push it the most, but that's where we're like kind of calming down, doing some recovery. And then about 2 weeks after the show, we can kind of gear up again. And then for me, coming off of nationals in December, I really wanted to get into a powerlifting meet. So we started changing training a little bit for that, putting a little more emphasis on that alactic days. And we've been slowly decreasing volume on substrate days. So.
Whose idea was it for you to get into bodybuilding? Did you guys did it happen naturally? Were you lifting long before you guys met, or?
I always think I wanted to do a bodybuilding show, but always money was an issue until the last couple of years. And then with us moving to Vegas, you know what? It was Brianni. Brianni was like, I'm doing a show. Why don't you do a show? And you're like, you know what? Why don't I do a show? And she's like, do this show. And I was like, I'm going to do that show. Yeah, and that's how we got into the Jay Cutler Desert Classic.
Yeah, well,
Brianni literally picked that show out for me.
Before that, you had we had hired a coach for you too, and you were kind of getting started on it. And then,
Alex Kiekel. Yeah.
And have you been lifting weights for a long time?
Yeah, about I'd say he's actually been coaching me our entire relationship, so 7 years. And I was lifting, just little frou-frou workouts in the gym before that. For a couple years, maybe 1 year, 2 years.
I think what's cool about your transformation is there hasn't been a huge transformation in body weight, right?
No.
In the last few years, because I've seen you post pictures. It's like, here I am at 160, and here I am at 160. Yeah.
So
something like that, or a couple pounds different.
Slowly gaining from 2017, but this last year has been pretty crazy because I got up to about 160, and then a really crazy body recomp, and I stayed at 160 up until pretty much my show. So into my first show, the Jay Cutler Desert Classic, I didn't lose any weight. I think on peak week, I maybe lost like 4 pounds. So to start prep at 160 and to enter peak week at 160, but like with some really dramatic body composition changes, it was really crazy.
Were you guys like when you look at the scale and you kind of see what's happening? Is there concern about that because you're thinking like, oh, we need to lose weight, or does the mirror tell you, tell the story basically?
I never worry about the scale.
I never worry about the scale. In fact, when the scale starts going down is when I get a little bit more stressed out. Granted, I haven't quite been lean enough. I've always kind of missed the mark on conditioning, but we're getting a little better with every show. I still hate to see the scale go down because, I've had so much experience with it going up and just seeing some pretty dramatic changes.
So that's the complete opposite of what most women would be saying, right?
And
they're
men.
like, well,
Yeah.
but I mean, especially like, women that are, especially like if they're lifting, they're training, I want to see the scale go down. Like that's what everyone's like fixated on.
Yes.
Did you always have this mindset, or did something happen to where you kind of like altered, and obviously you started lifting and eating for performance, but even before that, when you were just lifting, did you have something happen where you started looking at the scale differently?
So before bodybuilding, I've never been somebody who was hyper fixated on the number on the scale. But once bodybuilding prep started, I didn't have any expectations. I was just kind of following whatever he said to do. I didn't know what to expect. And as the scale stopped, didn't change at all. But like my body composition was obviously changing. I kind of really was excited about that. I was like, because my whole career in lifting, I've been pretty scrawny. It was been pretty hard for me to put on weight. And then once I started coaching with bodybuilding with Jake, I just started putting on a lot of mass, and I was very excited about that. So the number on the scale staying the same or going up, I was more excited about than anything. Was that what you were asking?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so like with that though, like what were you eating before when you were kind of like, you said you were a little bit more scrawny versus, all right, the scale's going up and now I'm actually getting excited?
So I wouldn't attribute it so much to just diet, but it was the harmony of diet mixed with some lifestyle habit changes and supplementation, and kind of just him working that out so they're all timed properly, and really just kind of threw me into a really cool groove where I just started gaining muscle like crazy. Oh, I would let him talk more about that topic than me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to actually follow up with, Jake. Like, what pitfalls do you see with most women that like want to get in shape, but then they do freak out about the scale, and then they start looking at the calories because they read online it's calories in, calories out, but then they get to you and maybe, I don't know, you tell them something like, no, actually focus on this, and they might rebuttal like, well, wait a second, but you're like, no, trust the system. Like, what are some of those pitfalls?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it's really easy to get hyper focused on the calories in, calories out, because they are important, and there's, it's very easy to say like, hey, weight's going to go up or weight's going to go down based on caloric intake, but there's so many factors that can determine what that food is going to do and how it's going to be utilized as well. So like nutritional fates, there's epigenetics, there's so many things that come into play. And if you can time them out and get this person into a nice flow, there's so much you can do with so little, like drugs or supplementation as well. So with those people, if it's like, let's say their goal is just to get lean, and they're like, hey, I want to add muscle and I want to lose fat, which is everybody, right? Like for the most part, it's like, hey, this, like if we're doing this right, there might not be a dramatic change on the scale, right? Because there's like, even throughout a week, it's like, hey, maybe we lost, like a pound of fat, but maybe we added a little bit in glycogen retention, a little bit in actual myosin chains, and a little bit of inflammation. It's like, that doesn't really matter too much, And I think that's where a lot of bodybuilding preps go south, is we get so focused on just calories in, calories out, that we're not actually even sure if we're like losing pure body fat or even mostly body fat anymore, because it's just like, hey, move more steps, more calories burned. I'm going to take a drug that's going to, increase my metabolic rate. And it's not really timed out to make sure we're just losing fat or putting ourselves in situations to maintain our muscle too.
It seems to be really hard to just lose fat.
It is. I mean, it's not
Like when you have a lot of body fat, maybe it's a lot easier. But as you get leaner,
it's going to be more resistant for sure.
and I think for most people, you know, you take our buddy Josh Settlage here, or you take even myself, where I'm at, it's like, well, how much more fat are we really going to pull off? Like, and somebody like feeling fat or thinking that they look fatter than they want to be, their best option could be potentially just to gain some muscle mass, because it might be a little bit easier to be in a little bit of a caloric surplus and to have that calorie surplus and your other behaviors to encourage you to put more muscle mass on. It might be a little bit easier to give that little extra push as opposed to just kind of continually pulling on this string. I heard somebody describing trying to reduce your calories as trying to hold your breath underwater. And I thought, like, that's a really good analogy.
Yeah, I got to come up for some air sometimes.
You got to come up for some air at some point. And then, you know, how are you going to breathe depending on how long you've been down there for, right? You're going to breathe a lot. And kind of the same thing's going to happen with your food. If you restrict it way too much, you're going to have a tendency to rebound or overeat.
Yeah, you're going to start to have a lot of debts that the brain is really going to want to pay off. And you really start to build up those cravings. So it's just, in my opinion, like if you can always kind of manage this, like this person's biology where you're handling their stress, the amount of oxidative stress they're building up, and you can keep them in this nice groove and you're kind of paying off those debts correctly. You know, I really haven't had a situation where we've gotten stuck where it's like, hey, we just can't get this person leaner anymore. They feel like crap. Like I think every like bodybuilder we've worked with so far is like 2 weeks out and like, I feel like I should feel worse. Like, you know, and if you can always just kind of manage that and gauge where they're at and you're just kind of always looking under the hood, there's always something to do, you know.
What kind of calories were you at as you got towards competition?
I don't know exactly because I'm on a meal plan, but I would estimate I never got below 1,600.
And then like any idea where you started? Maybe 2,500 or something like that?
No idea where I started.
Yeah, we never actually like track calories, which might seem like really crazy for a bodybuilding prep, but I've never actually tracked calories for any of my bodybuilders.
And especially at this level with like how well how well you've done. And sorry, I don't have internet, so I can't pull up pictures right now. But what were you eating though? Like, was it your typical, like, I'll say bodybuilder style stuff where it's like carbs, lean chicken breast and stuff that you like makes you want to just hate life?
No, in fact, I always got a lot of messages on Instagram like, how are you eating that in bodybuilding prep?
Nice.
Like, who is your coach? But yeah, as far as diet is concerned, we kind of take like, so I eat all my carbs right around my training window, pre, intra, and post. And then the rest of my day really kind of looks like a keto diet, not for the purpose of like trying to get in ketosis, just for kind of managing inflammations and a bunch of other really cool stuff. And then also the performance you get from having all your carbs right around training. So I never felt depleted in training. Always had a lot of food source for recovery and stuff like that. And that really works well for me.
Yeah. Did you feel like the low carbs and like the keto style diet around, so like away from training, did that just help you feel fuller and like feel fuller longer?
Yes. Yeah. And it's really easy. My body really craves fats. It does really well with fats. So eating in that style, like my digestion is great. I'm as satiated as I can be. I mean, I'm always kind of hungry no matter what season of life I'm in. But as far as satiation, it helps a lot more just not eating carbs outside of my training window.
Yeah, that's
always
awesome.
hungry. Me too.
Yeah, that's cool because it kind of goes against what, like, you know, you do a Google search on like bodybuilding diet and we know what's going to come up, right?
Chicken,
it's going to be
asparagus, broccoli.
Yes. And then so when you hear somebody that's having so much success, like, no, it's actually more keto style. I just love that because it kind of throws a wrench into everything. Like, okay, now I have to go back and analyze and figure out what I'm doing wrong because I don't look as good as her. Like, okay, it's a cool question that comes up, you know?
Yeah.
I love that.
You're probably wondering, why am I wearing these glasses? Well, it's because I'm being bathed in blue light. And blue light isn't necessarily bad. There's blue light in the sun. But if you're in your office, if you're indoors, if you're in front of a screen during the daytime, it's not a great idea to have your eyes being bathed by blue light all day long. That's why EMR Tech, a company that we've partnered with, has blue light daytime glasses and blue light blocking evening glasses. These glasses right here are meant for you to wear during the daytime when you're in front of screens, etc. But if you're outside, take the glasses off and get the natural sunlight. And if you're at home in the evening when sun sets and you need to be in front of the TV or you need to be in front of your computer or on your phone, these glasses are the ones to get. They also have the best red light therapy devices on the market. If you stand in front of any of EMR Tech's red light therapy devices, you will actually feel how much stronger the output of the red light is on those devices versus any of the competitors. They also have some of their smaller red light devices like their Fire Wave, Fire Dragon, and Fire Storm. And then if you want to get some of their bigger panels, they have their Fire Hawk, which is their biggest panel, and the Inferno panel. These are literally the best red light therapy devices on the market. And if you want to save on them, Andrew, how can they do that?
Yes, you got to head over to emrtech.com. That's emr-tech.com. And at checkout, enter promo code Power Project to save 20% off your entire order. Again, that's emrtech.com, promo code Power Project. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
What are you guys doing, like from a cardio perspective? Is there a lot of cardio training in there?
Gosh, so minimal. Another comment I get from a lot of my bodybuilding peers at the gym I go to are like, why don't I ever see you doing cardio? I'm never doing a steady state cardio. And I'm almost never doing cardio for cardio's sake. A lot of it's like my warm up may look like a cardiovascular workout from the outside looking in. But it's really like it has a purpose and it's for a potentiation for the workout I'm doing that day. And the most cardio I really did in the deepest like depths of prep was about like 2 400-meter sprints on an assault bike right in the morning. And that takes about 5 minutes. And that's it.
It's kind of like that 8-minute run you're doing right now. It's like kind of wake up. She'd have a little assault bike sprint and then that was it.
100-meter sprint takes, on a bike, takes 6 seconds or something?
A 400-meter sprint.
400 meters.
Yeah, it takes about,
maybe 10, 20 seconds.
Yeah.
I think it was closer to 30.
Like,
the way
30, 40 seconds. I think that sounds right. And then you'd have like a 2-minute rest and then do it again. So,
And that's just to kind of like kickstart the day.
Yeah, manage blood glucose, kind of get into a nice fatty acid. Like, we're really working on like PBO skills too, which is like why we're doing the high fat meals with no carbs in the beginning and the end of the days and whatever. Like we really want to be able to pay off those debts with fat as much as possible.
Yeah. I think PBO is a good thing to talk about when we're talking about why some people can't get lean.
The fuck
either.
is PBO?
Lots of
you want
syllables.
Peanut butter on
Oatmeal.
toast. Oh, peanut butter oatmeal. There we go.
Peanut butter oatmeal. You're not doing peanut butter oatmeal?
I haven't heard about this
That's
yet.
why you're not getting lean enough. That's why you don't have to try the glutes.
I don't know.
I want to do peanut butter
sign me
oatmeal and
up.
get lean.
It's parasympathetic beta oxidation.
man.
Lots of syllables, yeah.
It's essentially just this ability to utilize fatty acids without relying on sympathetic ligands. So we're talking about like you don't want to have to rely on something like epinephrine to be able to burn off body fat. We don't want to have to rely on caffeine, Clen, Adderall, whatever, to be able to burn off body fat. We want to be able to do it in a very parasympathetic state, while we're sleeping, while we're doing whatever. And then we're really not building up as much inflammatory responses, and we get to keep burning fat.
And then is there a particular structure to the weights that's like assisting with muscle growth, or like is it a hypertrophy workout, strength workout?
For in bodybuilding prep?
Yeah, for what you're doing.
It's actually, there's a really cool combination of like a substrate type glycolytic workout and alactic workouts. So for me, I really love that style of training because it breaks up the monotony of just going in and hitting 4 sets of 20 on every single thing every single day. So I kind of have a day where I'm coming in and I'm hitting low weights, low rest, high reps, supersets on everything. And that's kind of like our glycolytic style of training. And then a day where it's alactic development. And that's kind of a higher weight, higher rest, low rep.
Yeah, so what we would do, especially when she first got started, is we would do 2 glycolytic days back to back. So we would have kind of that, that high rep, low rest, lots of kind of that typical like hypertrophy thing, 2 days back to back. We'd have a rest day, and then we'd have an alactic day and a creatine day, and maybe one more alactic day.
So the 2 days back to back are to maybe deplete glycogen a little bit, and then the next 2 days, maybe she's burning a little bit more fat.
Kind of, yeah. So those first 2 days, we were really trying to push out as much glucose synthase as we possibly could. So she'd usually look a little bit flatter and a little puffier. And then we'd use a little bit of supplementation on that rest day to be able to act upon all the crap that we did, all that post-training effects that we built up over those 48 hours. And we push it right into an alactic day. And that way we're kind of getting, all and we kind of switched it up actually once we got into towards the end of prep there. But that way we're able to maintain all the glycogen storages. We're able to get a lot of that superficial tissue development by doing the heavy stuff. So like the way we set it up too is we barely used anything like Clinton. We actually put it on those alactic days to kind of potentiate those days, have her be able to squeeze a little bit harder, move a little bit harder. And then, yeah, it worked pretty well. And then we kind of switched it to a glycolytic alactic rest, glycolytic alactic, and then a creatine day. But what we're always trying to do is whenever you're doing like a workout, whatever it is, you're giving off, like when you do a training session, you're giving off very specific cytokines and very specific immune responses. And when you're done training, you're going to get the macrophages and all the other things to respond to it. That's where you get that inflammatory response. And that window is going to last anywhere from like 24 to 72 hours. So you're always trying to feed it accordingly. It's like, here's the information we have. This is the damage it did. This is what occurred metabolically, whatever. Now, how can we potentiate that to the next day? Or do we need to recover from it the next day? So every workout was set up. So it was always a 72-hour window that was set up. So it was never like arms, back, legs, or whatever. It was always like, hey, if we do this, this is going to set up the next day and the next day. And it's always just this kind of continual epigenetic staircase we're trying to build.
Yeah, and another cool thing that I experienced, or didn't experience for that matter, that I hear a lot of people talk about is like feeling flat. Like there was not a single day in prep that I felt flat, or I just felt full all the time where I needed to. I mean, we intentionally had to make my upper body feel flat to fit more into wellness, but like I was feeling really full where I needed to all the time.
So I intentionally maybe like not train the upper body too hard kind of thing?
Yeah, not doing any like glycolytic work, upper body.
She actually was benching really heavy her whole prep.
I was hitting like all-time bench PRs like 2-3 weeks out from bodybuilding show. It was really cool.
Yeah, we just kept all of her upper body work very heavy and alactic. So it was always kind of like kind of creatine work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're never doing any
It's not going to slap on a lot of muscle mass or anything like that, but it's going to send a good signal to keep the muscle tissue, and it's going to send a good signal to stay strong, or to even, in this case, get stronger.
Yeah, the thought process behind it was, hey, if we can make the superficial tissue very explosive and very strong, you kind of get a harder look to yourself. Like you kind of have
like
this
a more mature looking
and
muscle.
It makes you look a little leaner too. So even when we flatten it out a lot, for that wellness, like kind of disproportional look, it just looked very, very lean.
How do you manage hormones? What are some things that maybe some people are missing or not paying attention to, especially when it comes to women? Because we don't have that many women on the show. Mm-hmm. And so like, what are some things that you're maybe paying attention in prepping with her?
A lot of it comes down to like, to mood, right? And a lot of it comes down, again, I feel like I'm kind of like repeating myself, but to like oxidative stress, right? Like if we have too much damage, too much of this, stress that we don't have the capacity to manage, things are going to start to shut down. And so if we can always kind of keep, that under process, we're always looking for things like mood, bloatiness, even things like libido and whatever. You're kind of keeping a check on all those things. Like, hey, is this coming down? Is that abnormal? Are you more irritable? Are you more... is your sleep worse, whatever? It's like, hey, we're probably not quite managing this. Let's, work on that. And so it's so individualized. I don't really have like a very specific answer, but this is where like, glutathione really comes into play here, managing oxidative stress. You have, or even like, hey, maybe it's actually time to bump up fats a little bit right before you go to bed, or maybe it's time to bump up fats in the morning, or maybe it's time for more creatine work or whatever. And you're always kind of just managing this.
And when it comes to like, like carnitine and choline and some of these other things that you might use that maybe some people haven't heard of before, but I'm sure people in the bodybuilding community have heard of all these different things. How far into some of that stuff can you go when you go into like performance enhancing drugs before you end up maybe, I guess, ending up with some like results that maybe some aren't desired, like if you, I don't know if like a female should take like testosterone and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a really good question. So like for her, we used a total of like 10 milligrams of androgens per week. So we used very, very little, and we actually managed all of her all of her stuff with things like carnitine and glutathione and like insulin
Growth hormone.
and growth hormone. Those are like kind of the staples. Is we like I always kind of joke that the staples are we always use like growth hormone, insulin, max uptake, glutathione, and carnitine. Like if you know how to use those,
So there's so many performance enhancers you can dabble in before even touching androgens.
and just get some really significant results.
Really significant.
Like she really morphed. Like she's done androgens before this last year, but we threw those in, learned how to really utilize them, and she just had this dramatic change.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the kind of go-to things are like Anavar, maybe Primobolan, maybe some people take some low amounts of like testosterone or something like that. But it sounds like, you know, from what you guys are saying, you can get a lot out of something like growth hormone, insulin, and some of these other things.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the cool thing with growth hormone is you can use it as like a marathon runner, a bodybuilder, a jiu-jitsu athlete, a power lifter, and you can get results from it with everything as long as you know how to use it.
versatile.
Yeah. As long as you know how to use it and when to use it and whatnot. That's kind of the tricky thing though, is like with those things, like you can't just plug them in and they just work. Like if you go wake up at the middle of the night and take carnitine, it's not going to do what you want it to. But if you wake up in the middle of the night and you pin some Primobolan, it's like still going to work, you know, like it's going to do its thing. So if you can be very meticulous with how you're planning these things out, it's phenomenal what you can do.
And then with insulin, you got to be really cautious, right? Because this could be something, if you take too much of it, if you're not paying attention to the exact amount that you're supposed to take, you can end up in the hospital, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple though. It's like you have insulin syringes
Kinda
that are
hard to
made for
mess up.
insulin. So when you pull it, it says like, if you pull and it says 20, that's 20 insulins.
20 insulins.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I mean, it is something you have to be wary of, but especially for like, you know,
And even if you overdose a little bit on insulin, I mean, you just eat
a
in a
little bit more.
surplus of carbs. That's all they would do in the hospital anyways, is
Yeah.
give you an IV sugar water.
yeah, we've
you
had
can do that at
plenty
home.
of people in bodybuilding in Vegas who have made that mistake and accidentally
Call
did
him
like
at 2 a.m.
100.
Jake, help.
I know, it's like random people. Random people. They'd be like,
eat a
Jake
box
will
of
know what to
cereal,
do.
bro.
Yeah, you're
And-
going to
and
be
they're
fine
like-
in the morning.
And they're like, I went to the hospital. I'm like, what do they do? Give you juice? And they're like, yeah. And like, do you feel fine? Yeah. And you're like,
How's some expensive juice you got there?
oh, geez. Yeah. I mean, like, definitely, I'm not saying don't be wary of it for sure. But like,
Yeah, read up on it. Yeah. Learn about it. It's not hard to find
but
out.
before you use something, like, just be aware of what it is. Like, if you're just going to be like, oh, cool, I'm going to get insulin, like, don't like just
Yeah.
start.
You know, I don't understand what President Biden was talking about recently. He was talking about
I
lowering
never understand what he's talking about.
Yeah, I don't think anybody understands that. But he was talking about lowering the price of insulin, and I'm like, I got it from Walmart and Dixon for $35. Like, it seems pretty inexpensive.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, I mean, when you're using it for performance enhancing, you're
Oh.
using a lot less than when you're using it
Well,
for like
Yeah, they go through like a
diabetes.
bottle a day.
Yeah,
some
it
of
can,
them,
it can
right?
be very expensive, and also the Novolin R is
like if you get regular is very cheap. But if you're
Yeah.
getting like the Humalogs and the Lantus,
That can be very
it does
expensive.
get pretty
Oh, they're
pricey.
getting the good shit.
Yeah, unfortunately.
They're always so damn lucky.
God damn, now I got to be
liberals,
diabetic.
damn it.
So when Anavar was mentioned, you kind of had a little eye roll.
I feel like
what's going on with
Anavar
that?
is like the pumpkin spice latte of androgens, like the most basic, and every girl's like,
Do they have that at Starbucks? Anavar?
Well, Starbucks
if
we
they
got
don't,
to.
they should. Just kidding. But I feel like that's like every girl is like when they want to hop on an androgen, they're like, oh, I heard I should do Anavar, so let's do that.
It's
And
the one the coaches are pushing the most.
I think it's kind of just like, I think you're really stepping over dollars to pick up pennies with that. Honestly,
There's better drugs.
Well,
Way
there's
better
Better
drugs.
things you can do.
like there's so many different drugs out there, and if you like take 10 different people and you put them all on Anavar, it's silly. It's like, do you know what that does? And especially if your coach is like, hey, we're putting you on Anavar, it doesn't matter when you take it, just take it like first thing in the morning or whatever.
for like 8 weeks every day.
What? Like,
Doesn't
it
make
makes
any
no
sense.
sense. It's a methylated drug. Like, there's so many cool things about it that you could like take advantage of by just timing it out right? But
What are some supplements that you guys feel are actually effective? Like, you don't have to necessarily name a brand. If you want to, you can, but like essential amino acids, you mentioned max uptake. I like your product a lot. I utilize that as well. But what are some supplements that you guys feel actually are of benefit? And how does some of them work?
it depends on, I guess, what you want help with, right? Like, because you have something like, I don't know, like magnesium threonate or like magnesium glycinate or something. Like magnesium's pretty awesome. I really like the magnesium glycinate right now because you kind of got the glycine molecule with it. It just kind of helps you cool your body down, calm down, opens up the chloride anion channel. So just kind of the antagonist to the calcium ion channels. So kind of just shuts you down, makes sure things aren't like firing upstairs when things are really crazy. There's like, I don't know, you could use like an ashwagandha to kind of help with like, cortisol production. You could use like a saffron if you just kind of need a little kicker with your coffee or something. Like there are tons of stuff. It just kind of depends on what you want help with.
Yeah, I've noticed that about you and Andy Triana, that it's like super specific to the person and probably super specific to their personality. So if someone's already like real fiery and wired, they probably don't need the cup of coffee and the saffron.
No.
Like, hey, bro, let's cool it on that stuff.
Like,
and let's maybe go the other way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There are some staples that I use for everybody because they kind of get utilized a lot.
Creatine monohydrate.
Creatine's an awesome one. Like 5
to 10 grams.
Yeah.
Typical amount, whatever.
Yeah. And like it can be very different, like pre, intra, or post too, depending on what you're trying to do. Like, let's say you're just getting into creatine work like we just did. And you're like, yeah, I just want to, like have as much creatine as I possibly can. It's like, well, maybe let's put it pre and, whatever. Or maybe it's like, I'm trying to, use this creatine day to potentiate a heavy squat I have tomorrow. It's like, okay, maybe let's do that intra, make sure we don't deplete it and do a little post to, we make sure we're just kind of tapped off. But there's so many different supplements you can use, but it does all come down to like, if you want an athlete to perform at their best, whether it's bodybuilding, jiu-jitsu, powerlifting, whatever, you need them to be able to function really well. And so it's like, if there's somebody that's really up all the time and, like every time they eat, they're getting really bloaty. It's like, well, maybe don't need the saffron, right? Like maybe let's use a little like ashwagandha and like some meditation, post-workout before you eat or whatever. Just totally depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, it's just so fascinating how different everybody is and how different everybody responds. What are some of your goals now? You did a bodybuilding show. You have a powerlifting meet coming up, right?
Yeah, I'm like, 4 weeks? Am I 4 weeks out?
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, that's scary.
Got nervous.
Yeah. I just did my first 400-pound squat, which is kind of like, that was kind of like the powerlifting unicorn for me. And I benched 225 and I'm like,
hell yeah.
I got those. So now I feel like whatever happens at this meet, I'm going to be happy. But it would be cool to squat like 420. Bench 240, deadlift. I don't really care about deadlift. It's my token lift. But anything over 4 would be cool, I guess. And then after that, I have USAs in July. That's where I'm going to try to go for my pro card again. So those are the goals right now.
You're going for your pro card in bodybuilding.
In bodybuilding,
So
yeah. Well, in wellness.
Yeah.
Yeah, going back. I really like the dichotomy of the two because it's fun to have a season to like focus on what your body can look like and then have a season to not really care so much about what your body looks like, but what your body can accomplish. And also like being strong kind of like blunts the pain of being a little fatter in the off season.
So
go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, like, so what is wellness? Because like I'm familiar with it, but I don't know exactly like what's the difference between that and like I don't even know what else is like. Obviously, I know bikini's like a lot more like shredded look, but like, what is wellness?
So I'd say that the difference between bikini and wellness is not really anything to do with conditioning. They just want you to be disproportionately big in your bottom half. So the wellness girls are typically, amen, right? Like, thank God for that division.
It's like the most
opening up.
followed, yeah, by men.
So it's definitely my favorite look, and also I like training legs the most. So, but when you're looking at, I mean, wellness is relatively new to the U.S. It's been in Brazil for a long time. So when you're looking at the amateur leagues for wellness, you are going to see less conditioning.
Better.
You are going to see less conditioning for wellness just because there's not as many women who are as good in that division yet. But when we're looking at the pro leagues, shreddedness and conditioning is right there, neck and neck with bikini. But yeah, you're looking at being disproportionately big in your bottom half, and kind of like your glute tie-ins is like your money shot there.
How do we get disproportionate glutes? What do we got to do around here?
Talk to this magic science man over here.
Just work the glutes. I think that's it. Yeah.
Which it's funny because I had
exercises.
I had such a hard time growing my upper body my entire lifting career. And then once I decided to get into wellness, where you need to have a small upper body, my upper body just started growing. So then we actually had to do some work to like keep my upper body flat and not looking so big, which is cool, but also like, oh man, I couldn't have this before.
Just a lot of the basics, squats and deadlifts and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of specific like isolation work too. So kind of the way that we would set it up is on those kind of glycolytic days, the high reps, low rest. We would usually do with machine work because we don't want the limiting factor to be like, hey, I just can't maintain my technique during this extreme hypoxia. And we'd use things like squats and deads or like variations of them for the alactic days where it's like, hey, I just want to be able to push a lot of weight and just get really intense. And those are just things she enjoyed too. But yeah, a little bit of everything. I mean, we did everything from like jumps, like you just saw, to like med ball stuff, to like the typical machine work you see bodybuilders do, to like powerlifting stuff. She's kind of done it all.
Some of the things where there's less weight, it doesn't require the same amount. It doesn't cost the body the same amount, right, as like a squat or deadlift. So if you do like a glute bridge, or you do, step up, or some of these other exercises, they're not going to be nearly as strenuous probably on your whole system, right?
Yeah, you don't really have to involve the motor cortex nearly as much. It's not nearly as a refined, pathway that we're trying to recruit and whatnot. So it's just like suffer, just like keep doing this single leg, whatever, or single motor pattern thing.
Which I love that part.
Yeah.
Bodybuilding training is probably my favorite style of training. Just that like shut up and suffer type of training style.
Yeah, very simple, but just focus on like, this hurts and I'm just going to keep going kind of thing. If you're doing that with a squat, it gets messy quick. Like I did that Tom Platz challenge, and like, it gets difficult very, very quickly.
Yeah, you and Joe did that. That was wild.
Yeah, I think that's probably the hardest thing I've ever trained for in my entire life.
How many reps did you do again? It was like 500 pounds, right? 520 or something?
Yeah, the last training day I did 500 for 20, and then the day of it was 525 for 18. So yeah, that was brutal. I weighed like 221, 222 at that time, so I was very like light. It was brutal.
Was it just like horrible afterwards?
Oh man, yeah, because I remember I got to like somewhere around like rep 15 or 16, and you're just like, dude, I can't see anymore, and I can't breathe, and this weight's like, like my diaphragm's too hypoxic to get a full breath, and so you're just like, okay,
that sounds terrifying,
and everything hurts, and you're just like, I'm just gonna push, and technique gets ugly. And
can't see anything.
Yeah, and
can't feel your feet.
Yeah, I finished like when I did that 500 for 20. I finished. The goal was to get 20, and I got 20, and I was like, cool. And I'm like, how do I get this back in the rack? And I was like trying to take a step forward, and nothing was working. I was like, oh my gosh, like this is getting intense.
Then you're like, oh, does he want to hold it on his back to feel it? Like he conquered.
I'm like, no, you can't say anything either.
Yeah.
Like, get me out of here.
Talk. Yeah.
You did that the day before, you said?
No, it was like 2 weeks before.
Okay, I was like,
That's the
holy
last training
shit.
day.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a ton of fun. It's actually something I might get into again at some point.
I want you to do it again. I want you to try again. Because you were so close.
Yeah.
And there was some like shitty circumstances. Like it was like the middle of summer in Las Vegas, and the AC was out the night before. So he was like, so there was just like a bunch of stuff that kind of didn't set him up for the most success that day. And I really feel like he could do it. So I want him to do it again or try it again.
It's a fun one.
How did you train for that? How did you train for that many reps like that?
So I figured that the biggest thing that would keep me from getting it is basically like this, being able to have my technique, have this cognitive function while respirations and like, the total liver and immune function are crazy high. So what I did, we actually had a little, have you seen a K-box? Do you know what a K-box is?
Yeah, it's like a
little flywheel.
A flywheel, and you can attach a cable to it and do all kinds of different exercises with it, right?
Yeah. So a big part of what I was doing was like, I would take a vest, for the K-box. I'd get on the assault bike, and I was doing like 1,000 meter sprints, and I'd immediately hop onto the K-box with the high resistance and then squat for a minute and hop back on, and I would just work back and forth and back and forth.
For those of you who've never used flywheel training, like that will make you grow hair on your chest. It is one of the hardest contraptions I've ever been on. So
that was like a big part of it. I still had like heavy squat days with it, just because 525 pounds is still heavy enough that I had to like respect it, and so I still had days where I was squatting up to like 700 or so and just kind of maintaining the strength, and I just didn't want 500 to feel like it was light. And then, it was pretty brutal. I think the first like couple sessions, I was like, cool, I'm going to come in and I'm going to get on this assault bike and get on the K-box, and I'm going to be able to do like all these sets. And I got through like 4 sets and was just like throwing up. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is brutal. And then towards the end, I think I got through like 10 supersets of it. And I was like, okay, I feel as ready as I'm going to get for this.
There's no shame in wanting to have great sex. And there's no shame for wanting your member to perform the way it should be. A lot of us sometimes have some issue with blood flow, but that's where Joy Mode comes in. Let me read you these ingredients because it's not going to be very long. Vitamin C, L-citrulline, arginine nitrate, and Panic ginseng. The cool thing about the ingredients in this is that they're all natural and that they're going to help you increase your blood flow, not just everywhere. So you could use this as a pre-workout. You will increase blood flow when it counts to where you need it. So if you know you're going to have a good time a little bit later, 60 minutes beforehand, put some Joy Mode in some water, drink it. And then when it comes time to perform, and you know what I mean by perform, you're going to be ready because you're going to be flowing. Joy Mode's going to help you do that. Andrew, how can they get it?
Yes, that's over at usejoymode.com/powerproject. And at checkout, enter promo code POWERPROJECT to save 20% off your entire order. Again, usejoymode.com/powerproject, promo code POWERPROJECT, links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
Does it make it a lot easier to do a lot of these things as a couple? Like, do you guys go to the gym at the same time, and like, do you help each other with meal prep, or do you more like go your separate ways?
I think a lot of the stuff we do is pretty cohesive.
Yeah.
Like we do pretty well. I was just telling her the other day, like the things that I kind of like suck at planning, she's really good at, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so I'm always like, oh crap, I forgot
Like with
this.
packing, he'll always remember drugs. I always remember clothes. But like if we're packing to go on like,
You're like,
a
"Oh,
trip
shit,
to go
I forgot
train
my
with
trend."
somebody, he won't bring any training clothes. Anything.
Well,
And it's like a trip just to go train at a certain gym.
So just for a little backstory on this one. So I started working with Dan Green like 2 years ago, right? And I was all excited because I'm like, oh, cool, I'm going to go deadlift with Dan Green because he invited us out to his house and whatever. And we're like, oh, this is really cool. And then I get there and it's like, I'm going to deadlift with Dan Green that night. And then I'm like, I forgot my workout clothes.
All of them. And that's all he wears is workout clothes. I don't know how he forgot it.
But you remember the drugs, right?
I remember the
He
drugs.
remembers
It's
the
the
drugs.
important stuff.
Yeah.
It's okay. You
So
can-
we had to like,
Yeah, I mean, really, the drugs are the important stuff because you can go buy new clothes. You can't buy new drugs.
I can't go buy like injectable ATP at like
Yeah.
Lulu.
yeah, this is bullshit.
And then me, like, I'll bring all the drugs, but I won't bring a single syringe or anything to like administer drugs with.
Yeah.
So it's worthless.
Yeah. We do a
Sounds like
pretty
a match
good
made in
job.
heaven to me.
It is a match
Yeah.
made in heaven. Really,
Yeah,
soulmates. So
Yeah, so
romantic.
it's like, hey, you need some LSD? Like, got you. She's like,
You should
But-
have.
but I don't have
I have
pants.
LSD, but I don't have underwear.
Yeah. She's like, I brought it.
Like, is that liquid LSD or is that liquid Anavar?
I'm like, don't worry.
Mislabeled.
Don't touch it. I have it organized.
Yeah. The one with the red. It's the one with the red cap.
play a little
or it's
Russian
the one with
roulette.
the blue cap.
I forgot. Take them both. We'll figure it out.
Yeah,
I'll take one. You take the other. We'll know in 30 minutes.
yeah, it'll work out.
Yeah. Can you talk to us a little bit about Nectar? Because we've talked about it a bunch, but that stuff, you had said it's been reformulated. And so I'm really excited to hear about that because my initial experience with it wasn't like the most smoothest. And it did work really well. But again, my experience was a little bit like bumpy. So can you tell us about the new stuff?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So the first version of Nectar we had was carnitine and choline. And it was a little spicy. It worked really well, but when you injected it, it was pretty spicy.
That's what I meant too.
Yeah, and it would actually kind of like crystallize a little bit because we would just try to fill it up with as much as we could to try to saturate it. And,
As much choline was soluble, and it wasn't that soluble. So
yeah. And so like, man, if it ever got like any kind of cold or got shaken or whatever, it would, it'd start to crystallize or whatever. But we just, we reformulated it and we reformulated it with ceticholine too. So the ceticholine is a very potent form of choline. So it's actually like, it's very potent. And it's also, much more water soluble as well. And then we were able to balance the pH with it really well and just kind of tied it all together. And, after a couple rounds of trying to figure it out. And now it's really nice. It's really potent. It's really easy injection. It's really smooth. It's really nice now.
So for people, especially women who are not used to injecting a lot of volume, the volume will still kind of feel uncomfortable. It might feel like a little bit like a dead arm, but you won't get the spiciness that you had with the choline.
It feels very similar to like glutathione. I think it's even actually a little easier than glutathione now.
I disagree,
Wow.
but it is a lot easier than it used to be.
Yeah, glutathione, I was just joking in the gym. Like, that's the only thing I've ever injected where, like, it felt good, like the actual like injection of it.
That's
And
how she feels.
That's a little
sometimes.
weird, but
it is weird, but it's, I mean, all this shit's weird.
Yeah,
but,
that's true.
But it felt like I would look forward to that. The nectar I wouldn't, but I would do it anyway because it was a pre-training thing that I would like, just a ritual I got into. And so I started doing it. But when I ran out of that bottle, I was like,
I'm good.
Finally.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, where we used to get glutathione, it came already reconstituted, and it kind of just felt like battery acid going in.
Man, usually,
And I like really learned to love that battery acid feeling because I associated it with like youthfulness
well-being.
and healing. So I was like, oh yeah.
and I got to a point with the glutathione where I was like, dude, I'm not injecting this. It feels like battery acid. And it like comes already reconstituted.
And it kind of smelled like battery acid too. Like I just really liked that combination.
Yeah.
I was into it.
That was actually a big reason. That's actually why we started Better Through Biology in the first place, was the glutathione.
Yes.
Because I got so upset that it would always come already reconstituted. And like it's
By the
it's
time you
trash
get
by
it,
the time
it's
you get
already
it.
has like yellow hues, which means it's already starting its degrading process by the time you even get it.
Yeah. and
Which
so
that part kind of sucks.
We were like, I was always like, man, someone should just like lyophilize this, you know, kind of like growth hormone is.
You went to school for making steroids, right?
Oh yeah, essentially. Yeah. I'm just like Dr. Steroid.
You
Indirectly.
did learn a lot of this stuff in school, though, right? Like chemistry, right?
Yeah, that's actually like what got me into it was like OChem. I had a really sick OChem professor and he just really encouraged me to.
Yeah, he's a chemistry wizard. I took chemistry at an entry level chemistry class with him, and I was like, wow, I feel really dumb because he could just he could hear something once and it would just be like permanent in his brain.
Yeah,
And
she would get upset because I kind of like be on my phone and like trying to do other things.
Yeah,
at
he
the
wouldn't
same
take any
time.
notes.
And she's
anything.
like, well, you didn't listen. And then I'm like, I know everything
I'm
you're talking
bored.
about.
I already got it all.
I got an A in the class, and I tried really hard. And he got like an A+ in the class, and he was like minimal effort. He just would literally show up on test day and take the test. And I'm like, wouldn't that be nice?
Everyone's got
Probably
something.
injecting something to make them smarter.
Yeah,
that's the key. I
hold
was
it
way ahead of
out.
the
Hold it
curve.
out on the rest of the class.
Yeah, that's great. But yeah, that's the glutathione. The glutathione was, I finally was just like, let's freeze dry it.
What does the carnitine and choline do?
So a couple of things. They have some pretty cool synergistic effects, and it kind of, you know, there's a lot of ways to look at that, because we could look at it in a kind of creatine way that we were talking about, where we're actually kind of shortening that glycolytic window. But instead of opening up a creatine window, we're actually kind of opening up the fatty acid window, where we're kind of steering the body to want to utilize fatty acids more. So we're injecting so we're going to have super levels of physiological levels of carnitine, and it's going to bias this fatty acid production and beta oxidation. So that part we're getting a lot of extra, fatty acid, a lot of extra energy from it, relying on glucose a little less. And then the choline's just it will, especially with acetylcholine, it's going to quickly turn into acetylcholine, and that's one of our main neurotransmitters in the brain, like a lot with this like executive, deep, critical thinking. That's all like choline's like the staple there. So our ability to like process things, make, cognitive decisions. So by pairing them together, especially in sports like, powerlifting, bodybuilding, jiu-jitsu, martial arts, whatever, if you're getting less lactic, you're burning out, not nearly as slow, while also having this cognitive enhancement. All of a sudden you're just on a completely different level than everybody else. And even while you're training, like those sets where you're normally like, I'm calling it here, like you just kind of fly past that, and all of a sudden you're on the next set and you're like, wow, I'm still feeling pretty good, and you're still kind of like feeling pretty cognitive. And I'm sure you've had those training sessions where you're done, you're like, dude, I don't even know what my name is right now. I can't, I'm out. Kind of like avoids that. We're going to lower the amount of stress that we get in the first place, and, cognitive enhancement staying a lot higher. Even the ability to contract is going to be a lot higher as well, because we start getting a lot of extra lactic acid and whatever in our tissue. And when that happens and they get hypoxic, we actually have a defense mechanism that doesn't allow us to contract as hard, which I'm sure you felt. So it's like, I just can't get past this. And by lowering that, we actually lower the threshold, right? Or higher the threshold. And now we can push past, get a couple extra reps.
What about DADA? We were talking about that a little bit in the gym.
Diisopropylene dichloroacetate. It's pretty cool.
Lots of syllables there.
That's why we call it DADA. Yeah. It's pretty cool. So it's going to inhibit PDK. So basically, like, we're going to push things away from this glycolysis as well and move things straight into oxidative phosphorylation. So you can burn glucose with oxygen. You can burn it without oxygen. And so we're pushing the body to burn it with oxygen, which is also going to allow us to push past those where we normally would have had this lactic threshold really pop up. now we're not getting there. So, like a lot of the times with like my combat athletes, we use a little bit of nectar and data together, and it's pretty potent. All of a sudden, they're like, wow, I'm clear, I'm functional, I'm recovering really quickly, and I'm like kind of have an edge on my opponent. We didn't even have to use any kind of anabolics.
Does some of that stuff sometimes maybe override, do you think, like what's inside the body naturally that prevents us from going there? Do you think like sometimes those natural things are good, and
No, that's it.
maybe you should be a little cautious with like how often we use these things? Or
Are you saying be cautious with drugs?
Yeah, maybe.
That feels very, very anti-Mark. I didn't know I was going to be on this kind of podcast. Yes and no. Because there are ways to utilize, and that's why it's getting used in cancer research so much, talking about data, is that it kind of, what's the right word to say that? I don't want to say this wrong. Makes us feel healthier than we are, like makes the body interpret what we should be doing already, which is why it's so useful. Like a lot of people, if they were healthy, they would already be doing this in the first place. And now, but anytime we're talking about like hyper competition, like we're going to push things maybe a little bit too far. So absolutely, like maybe we inject so much data and, like maybe like DMG or something that you're like, wow, I can't feel anything, and rip, now something goes. But I mean, yes and no. It really just depends on how you're using it and how hyper competitive you're being. Because like if you're using it for a temporary boost, absolutely. But if you're injecting like half a vial to try to beat up your training partner, then
I know for myself, like I've used like LSD like on a run. I've done mushrooms. I've done kratom, and sometimes like, man, I can just run all day on this.
Right.
But then there is an after. There is like the next day. Like, holy shit, like
I still have to
my
live
body,
tomorrow.
Yeah, my body really does feel it. It's just that in the moment, my body didn't feel it because I'm kind of numb to some of those things.
With things like carnitine and data, for the most part, you're going to avoid, that's what you're actually trying to do, is avoid that next day feeling. Like you're not getting there because you're pushing so much oxidative stress down, right?
I see.
But with things like, let's say like kratom, for example, like we're going to get a big glutamate rush, and that kind of gives us that opiate like high, right? Like that's the thing that feels like an opiate high, is we get this massive glutamate rush, and it feels good. But that causes a lot of oxidative stress. And that's going to cause hypercalcium postsynaptically, and that's going to cause phospholipases to come into the cell membrane, and that's going to cause it to degrade. And now the mitochondria is not functioning, and it's dead. Right now, it actually starts the process of cell death. But if we avoid that from happening in the first place by using things like, carnitine, data, whatever, we're not getting there, right? But if we use things like, LSD and kratom and whatever, which again, they can be awesome PEDs, really awesome. We've prescribed them all the time for different, especially on the events the day of, where you're just looking for the extra kick. That's going to make you feel things that, it's going to hurt a little bit the next day. But you did that at a cost of a better competition. So,
Right.
Yeah. And like one thing to note is like the farther you want to step into the competitive realm of any sport, the farther you're going to step away from
not
just
healthy.
being truly healthy.
Yeah.
So you have to you're going to have to like prioritize those things as you go.
If you're going to be competitive in anything, if you really want to be the best you possibly can, you're going to get to a point where it's not healthy no matter how you do it anymore. There are ways to minimize that risk, but being hyper competitive, I don't think anybody actually feels like they're doing something that's healthy. Like being the best at literally anything
Absolutely
it's
not.
very strenuous. Like video games, martial arts, like literally anything. Like it's, you're pushing your body to do something it really doesn't want to do.
What are some other cool things that maybe people don't know too much about? You mentioned DMG. Like, what's that one?
Oh, we're actually coming out with a really sick product we're pretty pumped about.
Yeah. Maybe a good time to talk about that.
Yeah, so we're actually going to have an injectable creatine product.
Hey, now.
Oh.
Yeah, everybody's wanted to inject creatine before, right? Like I thought it was really funny too. Like Andy and I, Superbrain, were joking about it because as like a kid, you always are kind of like, oh, I'm just injecting creatine, or whatever. Now we're like, oh, we're actually making that product.
Do that.
Yeah, so Andy and I kind of developed this, but it's actually a creatine phosphate. So it's not just like creatine monohydrate. So like typical creatine, when you take it, goes into your gut, you have the monohydrate part removed, then it has to be phosphorylated. It becomes creatine phosphate. Now it's usable. But this is going to be creatine phosphate mixed with DMG. It'll have a little bit of carnitine choline in there as well. It'll have a little bit of bicarbonate and all these things to kind of lower this lactic threshold and increase your power output. So that's going to be a pretty cool one as well. But other things other than that, I mean, like DMG is really cool. Dimethylglycine, it's going to lower that lactic threshold as well. Like, you know, there's so many cool things out there.
TMG is a normal supplement too, right?
Trimethylglycine, yeah. It kind of makes it orally active, so it's a little bit more orally active that way. But yeah, in every sport kind of has like, I feel like hidden gems that people are missing, where like if you learn to utilize them, they're pretty sick.
So what sport would this new product work best for?
Man, like the two that I can think of that I would really I would use it for is like powerlifting and jujitsu. Because I feel like in jujitsu, one of the biggest things that you can run into, and Josh can like just wave at me and be like, no, get out of here. Is you're getting someone into a hold, or someone gets you into a hold. You get to a point where you're like, I just can't grip anymore. I can't grip, or I can't hold this anymore. You're kind of like losing that isometric strength because that respirations are high, total body hypoxia is really high, and this is just going to allow you to sit there and just like squeeze. And the same with powerlifting. You know, like a lot of times in powerlifting, when you peak, right, you're a little bit unhealthy, right? Like you shouldn't be able to go run a marathon or really even do like 50 lunges in a row, right? Like you're going for 1 rep max. And a lot of times a limiting factor becomes we're actually not in shape enough to recycle creatine. And so this is going to kind of lower that threshold and allow us to like exhibit and show off the strength that we do have with you know, kind of showing how without actually having to be in that great of shape.
How close to an event does somebody need to like administer some of these things, do you think? Like
I would use this all the time.
Yeah. Well, I just meant like you know, like is it 30 minutes before a match or 2 hours, or you know, like for convenience purposes, you know, could you take your shot at your house, you know, and not have to do it like in between rounds or in between matches or something like that?
No, yeah, yeah, I know, right? That's like
you're in the bathroom and like some other guy's like, "Oh, you too?" Yeah, Jake Benson, like, "What's up?"
Like I'm definitely gonna get staff from this one.
Oh god, yeah.
No, that's a good question. So things like nectar, like for example, where it's like carnitine choline, those things don't just go away just by injecting it. Like that carnitine actually needs to be utilized, right? So if you do it like, let's say you have a competition and like 30, you're like, I'm going to be there in 30 minutes, injecting before you leave, totally fine. If you're doing more of like an ATP or maybe like a creatine or something, a little bit closer could be helpful, but it just really depends on what you're trying to do. For the most part, I'd say like 30 minutes before, like something like data, like you probably just inject the morning of and be fine. Like it's gonna sit there for a little bit. But for the most part, like rule of thumb, I would say is probably like 30 minutes prior. Kind of the same time you'd want to take your caffeine and your pre-workout and start listening to your Metallica and stuff like that.
So any drawbacks to, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name of the shot of creatine, like the injectable creatine, like any drawbacks of like taking, like as you said, I take it all the time. Is there anything like bad, like with like using it all the time or anything like that?
You know, I think the biggest thing that could happen there is like, and this is just hypothetical because I don't know yet, but I think the biggest drawback would be like I am squeezing so hard that I could tear something, right? Like it's the same thing with like tren. It's like if I take too much tren, I'm going to tear something because I'm literally too strong, or like I can't deal with this postsynaptic calcium, you know? And that's really where most tears come from. I don't imagine that to happen. Like I feel like you'd have to take quite a freaking bit of that to really get to that point. Okay. And you're not, again, like using something like LSD or kratom or something that's giving you this neurochemical excitation, where it's allowing you to, you actually have so much neurochemical activity going on that you're like going crazy. It's not going to have anything to do with neurochemical, it's not going to produce like more dopamine or like more norepi or more glutamate or something. So in that regard, I feel like it should be pretty safe.
For the month of April, you're going to receive 25% off all Vivo barefoot shoes. Nsima, can you tell us why these shoes are so great?
For years on this podcast, we've been talking about the benefit of barefoot shoes. And these are the shoes I used to use back in like 2017, 2018. My old Metcons. They are flat, but they're not very wide and they're very stiff and they don't move. That's why we've been partnering with and we've been using Vivo barefoot shoes. These are the Modus Strength shoe because not only are they wide, I have wide ass feet and so do we here on the podcast, especially as our feet have gotten stronger, but they're flexible. So when you're doing certain movements, like let's say you're doing jumping or you're doing split squats or you're doing movements where your toes need to flex and move, your feet are able to do that and perform in this shoe, allowing them to get stronger over time. And obviously, they're flexible. So your foot's allowed to be a foot. And when you're doing all types of exercise, your feet will get stronger, improving your ability to move. Andrew, how can they get their hands on these?
Yes, and for the month of April, you're going to receive 25% off all of your Vivo Barefoot shoes. That is a limited time deal for the month of April only. So if you've been waiting for the perfect time to buy your Vivo Barefoot shoes, now is that time. Head over to vivobarefoot.com/powerproject, enter the code for April, and receive 25% off your entire order. Link is in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
All right, we were talking about drugs.
Yay.
We're always talking about drugs on this podcast.
I know, right? Can't get away from my past, you know. Once a gangsta, always a gangsta, as they say. You could take the kid out of Poughkeepsie, but you can't take something like, I don't know.
It's funny. I was just telling
what those
Kiara on the
sayings.
way over here that I love. You made this post the other day that was like, "Oh, I really like kratom, and some people like alcohol, but like, why would you do life without drugs?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, Mark, that would suck."
Yeah, who wants to
would
just
suck.
sit there in the middle?
Yeah, it's
Be
like
sober.
and just be able to say I've never taken drugs. Like I hope you feel really good up there.
Yeah,
It's really nice down here.
yeah, you missed out. Oh, when I was younger, I always felt like I was going to take steroids. Like even when I was like 16, 17 years old, everybody thought I was on them anyway. But I just always thought like, yeah, when I get a chance, like I am going to take those. They seem amazing.
That's how
I would
was
read
too.
about it. I'd be so excited. I was like, what? Puts on muscle? And like the articles I was reading, they were just saying like what they do. They weren't really, and it did say side effects. It talked about side effects, and I was like, well,
Worth it.
benefit sounds way crazy compared to the side effects. Like
And
the
then,
side
like-
effects don't seem like that big a deal.
Tiny prints like enlarged heart.
Yeah, you never.
Maybe I will.
More room to love, you know?
It's like, is that as a kid? You're like, why is that bad? It sounds like a good big heart is good.
Well, and the like one of the books we have back here, it's got like the rating system of like androgenic to anabolic, and then like as you're looking through, you see one that's like off the charts on both. You're like, holy shit,
That's it. That's
yeah,
the one.
yeah, trend or whatever it was, or I think there was like some, I forget which ones it were. I think it was like some oral forms of like a methyl testosterone or something.
Oh
that was
yeah.
just completely off the charts. But like no one ever messed with that one because it's like, I don't know, it just fucks up your body too much or too liver toxic or something like that.
Yeah, probably hypertoxic. Yeah.
What is the deal with like trend? Like why is it a thing? Like why is it so powerful, do you think?
It's probably one of the few androgens that we have that pretty much all of its effects are like above the neck. It's going to really hit the brain hard. So if I remember right, it actually is really going to kick off really going to stimulate your olfactory nerve, which is actually your smelling nerve. And then by law of locality, just by it basically being really close, it kind of hits your amygdala, really gets the amygdala going.
Do other steroids do all this stuff to your brain?
Some of them do in different ways. Not like Trend does, though.
Changes your smell?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, have you ever been on Trend and be like, wow, I can't really smell anything anymore?
I haven't really noticed that before, but I have noticed that, you know, when you take the shot, sometimes you can taste it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get that trend. You like seem like you like it. You're like, yeah, you're really lit up. You're like,
No, he
yeah.
does not
Oh, the
like
good
it.
God, I love that flavor.
Oh, the good old days.
Oh yeah, you coughing. I had a friend tell me like, oh, if you ever get the trend cough, he's like, you just ride it out, just cough. And that was the worst advice. Like the best advice is to try to block it and not cough at all.
Dude, if you
'Cause
start
if you start,
coughing,
it's over.
hypothetically, if you hypothetically start
Yeah,
coughing,
you're done. You're coughing for 4 or 5 minutes.
It sucks. Yeah. I mean, hypothetically sucks. Don't try it. I've never tried it.
But let's get back to what's good about it.
In my opinion, it's kind of like you're almost like changing operating systems, right? Because what it's going to do is it's going to light up your amygdala so hard that it's actually going to start changing the way that it interacts with your thalamus and your hypothalamus. And now that's just going to be, you know, it's kind of changing the way that you are going to view a lot of things, which I'm sure you felt before. Like your peripheral outputs, the way that you're viewing the world now all becomes different. And like, that's why it's not like you really shouldn't run it more than like maybe 2 or 3 weeks at max, because like if you do that for too long, you will actually you can hypertrophy parts of your brain.
Mm.
And so
not the great parts to hypertrophy either.
yeah. So now it's like your hippocampus is starting to shrink a little bit. Your amygdala is starting to grow. And now you're actually like changing the whole dynamics of the way that your brain is and the way you think and the way that you view things. And all of a sudden some people get really paranoid, or there's some random people that get like really happy on it, you know, or whatever. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's a potent drug.
Makes you view everybody as being worthless. Look at how worthless and weak everybody is compared to me while I'm on trend.
I know. I always felt like really great on it. Like, you feel strong, you're lean, you're like, oh, this is great. I'm awesome. Like, weight feels lighter. But yeah, it's pretty potent. It can permanently change the way that your brain is too.
What do you think it is about performance enhancing drugs that makes you stronger? Like, what's the mechanism of that? Like, obviously, it can make you bigger. But like,
it's like what you're saying, like trend or something, like you want to trend. So like, so it always, like, what strength is really just like, you have these like basically neuromuscular junctions, and they're allowed to accept so much electricity, and how much electricity they can accept is like how strong that contraction is going to be. And so what determines that is just going to be like, basically this limbic system can override a lot of stuff. So for example, with trend, it's like, cool, I have this massive boost in my amygdala, which is part of the limbic system, to the point that, you know, it's starting to view things as not as fearful as they would. And that's actually like kind of how opiates can work for some people and make them feel temporarily stronger as well. If you've ever, like, some people hate them, but some people actually feel like maybe create them for you, is that you're actually kind of lowering this defense mechanism. So normally when you're like, you know, view like a 700-pound squat or something, and you know, you're like, I'm going to need this much to be able to squat it. Your brain's like, no, I'm not going to allow that much to occur. But you take an opiate, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, normally I'm not okay with this.
I feel safe here.
But I feel okay. You know, and Trend's kind of working on that, but from the other, where it's just going to drive up so much electricity. It's like, yeah, let's go. And those defense mechanisms aren't really coming up to defend it anymore. So you're just allowing a lot more electricity to come into those neuromuscular junctions. Like, you know, with Trend, a lot of people don't even get that much bigger on it. And if they do, it's just because all of a sudden they're trying to train hard, you know. But yeah.
When it comes to like peptides, I know we mentioned insulin and growth hormone. I don't know if people think of those as peptides, but I believe they're in the peptide category.
Absolutely.
What are some, like, because peptides are popping up all over the place. There's hundreds of them now. What are some peptides that you have had success with, either using for yourself or with clients?
Man, like, it's really hard to beat growth hormone, to be honest. And like we were saying, there's so much versatility with growth hormone. And like what we were saying earlier is, like, if you do a specific kind of training session, like let's say Josh goes and does, you know, a jiu-jitsu session that involves so much of his motor cortex and so much of, you know, this part of the brain and whatever. And then like Kiara goes and does a bodybuilding session. They're both going to have, based on that training response that they have, those cells are going to start secreting these very hyper-specific proteins that are going to relay to the brain that this happened, right? It's like, okay, like, I had, you know, this much of this protein, this much of this protein. That means we were this hypoxic. That means I got, you know, hypoxic here. This means there's damage here, whatever. And then when we calm down, now we have the actual like response part of the immune system that comes and says, okay, now we got to clean this up. Are we going to do it to a super physiological level, or we, you know, whatever? And that's where growth hormone comes in. Like, growth hormone is really going to be able to play on that. So whether you did a bodybuilding session or whether you did like a jiu-jitsu session, you reap the benefits of it. You're going to adapt to whatever you're trying to adapt to better. So it's a really hard one to beat. Insulin's pretty awesome too. Like, man, insulin's like, again, you can use it for just about everybody. You can kind of even use it as like a learning tool. Like, you can use it to prevent muscle glycogen from depleting. You can use it for changing nutritional fades. You can use it for all sorts of things. Like,
where do you use insulin? Like, would you use it before workout, after workout?
Maybe both.
Where's best? Okay.
Yeah. So like, you know, you use a little bit of insulin like pre-workout to prevent, you know, glycogen, or to, you know, help glycogen retention. So we always do, like with Kiara, when, you know, we didn't want her to lose any of her tissue as she's like leaning out, we would use like usually about, correct me if I'm wrong, but 1 to 2 IU insulin pre-workout. We'd do like, as long as we could hold out to it, about 80 grams of carbs pre-workout and 300 milligrams of carnitine. Were
you able to feel that? Were you able to feel insulin when you took it?
You know, when I first started insulin, I felt a big difference, but I've used it for so long that I don't really feel it now. I think if I were to miss a couple days and then get back, I'd be like, oh, wow, yeah.
Because it can feel pretty cool, because it can like, you know, you know exactly what it does, but it seems like it just helps you kind of hold on to some of those carbohydrates and maybe hold on to them in your muscle tissues.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you know, the same thing post, like you use it post. It's kind of funny because like post-workout, if you do a really hard session and cortisol is high, let's say epinephrine's high, heart's beating, respirations are high, whatever, this is kind of like the optimal time to get fat, right? And so like the difference between, let's say you just finished a hard session and you're like still breathing hard, you're still drowning in sweat, and you're like, cool, I'm just like pumped this out, and I'm still hyped up and whatever. That's going to have a very different nutritional fate than if you were to go put your feet up, take a breath, like take 2 minutes to bring all that down. Use a little insulin for blood glucose. Maybe use, I don't know, like the meditation for.
Maybe I shouldn't just like act like a total animal when I get home from here and just like eat stuffing food in my face as I'm cooking. Maybe I should just sit down and relax and
breathe,
sit down,
and taste your food.
That's
and,
key.
Yeah, not be on your phone. Like you see a lot of people are like, but yeah, doing that, being like, kind of having that period of mindfulness, like go put your feet up for like 2 minutes, do a little breath work, do some insulin, maybe a little ashwagandha and growth hormone. And now those nutritional fates are very different, right? And we didn't have to use anything like Anavar, D-Ball, or Primo, or whatever. And now we're able to optimize, pre-workout and post-workout. We didn't lose any, glycogen or tissue or size there. And we got to optimize the nutritional fates post. And now we get to, we do a lot there.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about earlier with like some habitual and lifestyle changes that really made everything flow very well. Were just simple things like that, like calming down and bringing my heart rate down before I eat my post-workout meal and stuff like that. Like that played a large role in my transformation over the last year.
And intra-workout, you guys were mentioning a little bit of carbohydrates. That's just in a drink or something like that?
Yeah, like some dense, like heavy carb. Like we use Carbolin and creatine and Hydro-Whey or EAAs or something like that.
Yeah, I'll just kind of, to prevent that proteolysis, just like, you don't want to break down your own muscle tissue to make glucose, right? That's like cortisol's big function is like, if you wanted a really succinct definition for cortisol, just be like, it's making glucose out of non-glucose things, right? Like you don't want to break down your own amino acids, your own tissue just to provide, glucose. It's like, here's some EAAs, like here's a little bit of Carbolin, here's whatever. We're going to prevent breaking it down, too, with a little insulin or a little bit of carnitine to bias the fatty acid metabolism as well. And all of a sudden, like, if you really want to be lean, if you can preserve your muscle tissue first, like you look lean a lot quicker.
When it comes to building muscle, a lot of people will start looking at like their testosterone levels and that sort of thing. Is that something that people should be focused on when it comes to like, I guess, trying to optimize or maybe even potentially get on PEDs and that sort of thing? Is testosterone like the first thing that they should be looking at?
Oh yeah, definitely. No.
Yes.
The way that I personally view testosterone, I'm not saying this is right, but the way that I view it is it's just a way to recycle presynaptic choline. And like outside of that, it's like there's so many ways to I think there's more benefit to looking at your A1C and your fasting blood glucose to optimize growth than it is like your testosterone level. Like unless your testosterone level is like double digit as a man or something, like it's like there's probably better ways to optimize it. Like, I've continued to see my own bodybuilding athletes and powerlifting athletes put on a ton of tissue with like very, very, very normal, like 600 level testosterone levels. Like they don't need to be crazy. They don't need to be super physiological to be able to grow.
Yeah, and you see that with a lot of natural athletes. I mean, the guy that we just had on the show yesterday, Dre, now his testosterone was like 960 or something, just naturally. But
it's great.
You see it with a lot of natural athletes, they're able to build a lot of muscle tissue. And maybe that's because some of these athletes, maybe they have been more fortunate just to kind of naturally have their body optimized for glucose and things like that.
Yeah, and maybe it's just their lifestyle that they live too, right? Like they just kind of intuitively had these skills, or maybe just grew up in a certain way that it's like, it's normal for them to just go out on walks. Or I've even found some athletes I've worked with that, randomly they're like, hey, I just ended up fasting today. And I was like, how come? Like, it just felt right. And it was the right thing to do. Like if I was there, it would be the thing that we would do. And so sometimes like their intuition and lifestyle plays a really big part of it. Like, I've seen some athletes too, where they eat like very, very slow, and they're always lean. Like that definitely has a part of it. Right. Like there are a lot of things like that can play. But I think testosterone is kind of like, I think the pendulum has swung so far that testosterone's kind of getting to a point where it's like everyone should be on testosterone, lots of it and whatever. And that's not necessarily bad either. But it's like, hey, let's just understand what it's doing, right? Because, you know, not everybody needs to have like 1,500 plus level testosterone just to be a human, you know?
But it feels pretty good though.
Yeah. And it's like, if you're taking it because you're like, hey, I feel good at this level, then that's fine too. Like that's its own reason, right?
Yeah.
But to say like, I need to have X amount of testosterone to grow is, you know, you're not really looking at that the right way, I think.
And does any of it change when it comes to women?
I would kind of say the same thing. Like Kiara's testosterone levels have never been anything more than kind of average for women, outside of like really brief periods of where you know, we kind of mess things up or whatever.
Those are fun periods for a short time though too.
But,
get all aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, you know, any of the athletes I have, whether it's Hunter, Bree, her, whatever, we've never had like super physiological levels of testosterone while I've worked with them. They've always been very normal. People, you know, I'm sure they think they're on a ton of stuff, but man, you can like, if you really understand the process of what has to occur for muscle to rebuild at a super physiological level, it all really comes down to the immune system, you know? You have to have, like, if you have an immune system that's healthy, then you can damage things and it's able to repair that to a super physiological level. But if your immune system and these, like, you know, you're never really dealing with this, like, total oxidative stress and not managing it and everything, like, you need to use anabolic steroids to force that to happen now. And if you don't have to be there, then you don't have to be there.
And so then how do you like keep, you said oxidative stress in check?
This is where like glutathione is kind of like our, it's probably my favorite supplement, period.
What would you call that? Like if you could only take one supplement for the rest of your life?
Probably growth or glutathione.
Growth or glutathione.
I always debate between the two. Probably growth, but like outside of like, you know, those two would definitely be it. Because like with glutathione with my athletes, I have them so pinned down. I know their physiology so well that they're like, hey, I'm not digesting well. Or, hey, I've got a little acne. Or, hey, like my mood's a little blank. And I'm like, okay, we're starting to see their specific signs that like they cannot manage this total oxidative stress. And you give them a little bit of glutathione and things just turn around and manage. And that's kind of the cool thing too, is like, you don't have to have glutathione be this like, hey, you're just going to take it once a week at this dose. It's like, it's a very variable thing. It's like, hey, this week was very stressful. We had a heavy lift. They had travel. They got sick. It's cool. It's kind of mess around with it. But it's kind of this like, this tool you can use where it's like, I can keep things where they need to be. But you don't want to use it so much too, or then you don't get the adaptations you're actually looking for because it just kind of kills off everything.
You could literally take it like periodically too, right? Like you could take it kind of almost randomly, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it has acute benefits for sure.
Yeah, because that's kind of the way I take it. I take it maybe like every 3 weeks, just you know, go through different phases with my running and my lifting, and that just like piles up, and I start to feel kind of like sore and stiff, and I'm like, oh, I'm starting to feel everything in like my back, and just all the work is like accumulating on me. Then I'm just like, I forgot about glutathione. Let me take a shot of that.
Yeah, it's like your master antioxidant. It's phenomenal. But yeah, I mean, I have athletes that I've had take it like, you know, 3 days on, 1 day off for brief periods of time because, you know, stress was just really difficult. Then I've had people not use it for 3 weeks in a row, kind of like that. And it's like, okay, now we need it. And you're always trying to like keep this response where they can manage their training and adapt from it, but not so much that they're actually creating damage and destroying things. And that's kind of like one of those tools we can use to make sure we're kind of keeping things in check.
Are bodybuilders, are they starting to dive into utilizing things like Ozempic? Do you know? Because I'm just thinking like in my head, it seems like that would make a lot of sense since it seems to be so difficult for some people to reduce their calories.
Like semaglutide and that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they do, but I'm not a massive fan of it myself. I don't think that should be used for anybody that like lifts weights, really, or kind of blunting the training response that we would get naturally. And what we have seen with things like Ozempic too is that we almost get that like paralyzed stomach thing too, and we're starting to see people just like
bad side
fermented.
effects.
Yeah. Now, if you're like a sedentary, like, you know, fairly obese person that just really can't control their cravings and you don't have the ability to understand what's in your blood, like you can't tell. Like I'm sure right now, if you were like hyperglycemic, you would know. You can kind of feel it. Or if you have too many amino acids in your blood, you would feel it too. You'd be like, oh, I should probably go on a walk, or maybe I should just kind of chill out for a second. Like, you can kind of notice. And that's kind of what you get when you train, is you're very aware of like, I feel, or I'm hypo, you know? But I think a lot of the times with like, you know, sometimes when people get very obese, or they just don't really have this ability to manage it, like not really know when they're truly hungry or when there's too much in their blood. And I think that's a really good time for something like Ozempic.
What have you seen with BPC 157? We hear so much about it. Have you had success with it, or people that you work with?
Yeah. So like, maybe that's a good way to actually kind of talk about BPC, is talking about like glutathione with it, because glutathione can kind of prevent a lot of things from getting there, from getting to the point where they tear and break down, because they're not getting, the cells are very healthy. Let's say you get to a point where you actually tear something. For those acute responses, BPC and TB500, those little healing peptides, they're pretty dang helpful. I think where they kind of get lost, though, is that people think they're just like healing recovery things.
Recovery tools.
And they're not recovery tools. They're not going to like, it's not something you should just take because you're in prep or something, you know? It's like, that's more of something you do with like glutathione. If something is acutely torn, that's where you use it. It's kind of like an ACE card, though, and you want to save it as such.
Yeah, like if you're already committed to this race or this fight or this powerlifting competition, and like that could be the difference between you making it to the platform and not making it. That's like the when you should take it.
Yeah, so if you end up banged up from competition or something like that, you got a slight something or other in your hip or your groin or something, that's where you would utilize it? Maybe.
If it was actually after something occurred, I'd probably actually still go with like growth hormone and glutathione and go down that route. And then actually using things like with Kiara, she was saying after her show, training was kind of boring. And boring it was because it was mostly creatine work. Just a lot of creatine work, because we don't want to put any more oxidative stress. Like the damage that you can get from competing itself is a lot. And not just because like you stepped on stage or because you did something that you haven't done in training. Like everyone's gone and like lifted heavier, ran or whatever. But because it's an event that's something that you have anticipated is important, you're going to get a massive neurochemical rush, right? Like we've all been there on the platform when your name gets called, or like, you know, on the mats or whatever, you get that rush of nerves. You're performing at a higher level. You're really tuned in. You're going to get all sorts of neurochemical secretions from it. And because of that, like there's so much oxidative stress that a lot of the bang up you feel from it is just from like, wow, I have so much oxidative stress and so much damage that, you know, I'm going to use a little growth hormone or a little glutathione to manage it on the flip side. And then my training sessions are going to be stuff that are not going to add that oxidative stress. Now, let's say like you actually like tore your hip or like, you know, suffered an actual like acute injury. Absolutely. Like BPC, TB, it's a good time to use it. But that would be my 2 cents there.
Can some of this oxidative stress, can it be offset by like learning a skill set to work on your breathing? You mentioned meditation earlier. What about like, you know, things like nasal breathing? Like, will these things assist and help?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because if you're sitting there like hyperventilating, you're absolutely going to produce more neurochemical secretion. Like, and you know, you're going to get more glutamate. You're going to get a little more norepi. You're going to get all these, you know, random things. If you're sitting there like just very conscious of your breathing, doing meditations throughout the day, you're kind of keeping that at bay and not getting to a point where you're secreting way more than you can handle.
Yeah, because I found that that's like a great practice for me, is like just breathing, you know, working on nasal breathing for a while now with my runs. Seems to have way different impact than if I'm out there just like really huffing and puffing. And some days the stress, I can feel how much stress I have versus other days. You know, some days I can go out and I can run and I could be at an 11-minute mile pace the whole time, and I can run 6 or 7 or 8 miles and nasal breathe the whole time. Other times I try that exact same pace and can't even really go like more than like a mile until I start, you know, having to breathe, you know, in the nose, out the mouth. And I'm like, man, what the hell's going on? Like, why am I still so out of shape? But it's not necessarily being out of shape. It's just the stress accumulates on certain days, and other certain days maybe not.
Yeah, and just not prepared for it that day. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's like kind of like peaking athletes in any sport. It's like you got to make sure that that day that feels like you can run an 11-minute mile for 6 or 7 miles is the day that they're, competing. And that's just kind of, what makes it fun.
And what I do with that usually is I usually just back off.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, they don't want to do that. But for me, I guess things are different. Like I'm not competing in anything anymore.
Just take more kratom and try it again.
Yeah, that's always the answer. Take more kratom or inject something and then go give it another go.
Yeah. Sometimes though, you're right. It's just like, hey, I'm just, it's not there today. Instead, I'm going to do a walk or like maybe a mild bike ride or something, or I'm going to go throw a med ball around and going to call
even when I was competing, though, I didn't mind doing that. I didn't mind because I was like, I'm going to be here tomorrow. Like I'm coming back tomorrow. Like, so it's not that big a deal what happens today. You know, today is important, but I can still salvage the day. There's still a lot of work that I can do that's going to be productive, but I can't do the work that I wanted to do. And that's fine.
Yep. No, that's
I'm okay with my
approach.
body, like telling me like, don't fucking do this. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big thing. I feel like a lot of people don't really have the skill for it. It's like, hey, I'm doing this on this day. This is supposed to be what happens. And they force it to happen. And then, they can really get themselves into some trouble, whether that's like injury or then they get sick or then they get inflamed. And that starts a really bad cycle. But if you can just be aware enough to be, maybe not egotistical enough to just step back and be like, you know what, today's not the day. That's okay. I'm going to come back tomorrow or the next day. Yeah, I mean, that's the way to go. That's longevity for you.
Is there anything that you can take to help with, like, we'll say like comp jitters, like day of competition, like you're kind of in your own head, and like we talk about breathing techniques all the time, but I'm like literally like actually something that you could take maybe before you get in the car and head to the arena or whatever it may be. Is there anything that you can recommend that's like, okay, this actually will calm you down? You mentioned kratom, like anything like that.
No, that's a good question. I think a lot of that would depend on why the athlete was nervous in the first place. So let's say they're fearful of their opponent, they're fearful of the weight, they're fearful of like what other people think about them. And a lot of times you just have to actually kind of have them pull on that thread a little bit. It's like, why are we nervous? Why are we so jittery? If you can actually put them through almost like a hypnotic meditation that way, which Andy Triana does really well, all of a sudden they're kind of like, oh, I'm very aware of why I'm fearful, and you don't really need to take anything. I mean, there are things like kratom, there's tineptine that's kind of similar to that if you've ever tried that before too. And those things can kind of, in the same way that we were talking about earlier with like kratom or like an opiate or something, it makes you less fearful of a situation. So those things can do that. But I would always, before I even gave them that drug, like if we were going to use that drug, like, hey, what are we fearful about? Like what's our worst case scenario? Are we scared of losing? Are we scared of the way, this is? Or are we scared of the unknown? Because whatever. So I've had athletes sometimes be very nervous about an event. And then we go there and it's like, okay, let's like, we're on the mat, the field, the, power, or the gym, whatever, wherever we're competing. And we just kind of go through and you touch like, hey, here's a barbell, like touch it, feel it. This is what it feels like. We're here, like, doing a lot of things just to kind of bring things to the front of the mind. And all of a sudden they're like, no, I'm good. Like, I don't need it anymore,
What are some things that you do that are maybe like not so direct when it comes to like lifting? That's like a routine that you think assisted you to get in the shape that you were in, like sleep routines or like, are you going out on walks, or is there anything other, are there any other particulars? You mentioned meditation. Are there some other habits that you had that you think was really helpful? A nap or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, I wish I could have a nap. There's like no naps for you. But that's a really good question. So first thing in the morning, we wake up and we take our dogs for a walk. And that really helps. Like you get the sunshine, like you just kind of enjoy nature, the dogs. And that's fasted. We do that nasal breathing. We're keeping our heart rate under 100.
No talking.
Don't talk to me. This is
Mouth tape.
This is my PPO time. Just kidding.
It's really funny in the morning. I'm like a morning guy, so I'm like sitting there like, talking.
I am not a morning guy.
Like,
my enthusiasm doesn't wake up till like 9 or 10 a.m. and his is up bright and early. Yeah,
mine's like 5 a.m. I'm like, oh, here we go.
Yeah, and then bringing my heart rate down before any meal I have that has carbs in it. So like within 10 to 20 beats of my resting heart rate, and meditations are post-workout, and we
What's
have
that
our
look like?
Yeah, for me, I actually just follow, there's an app called Balance, and I just follow a guided meditation on balance with my feet up, my eyes closed. And I really enjoy that. Well,
Feet
actually,
up like on a couch and you're on your back on the floor or something like that?
yeah, something like that. Yeah, actually, that's like the one thing I really have to like force myself to do because I don't want to like stop and slow down to do that. But when I do that, it's really definitely I feel the benefit of it. And a sleep routine. So every night at 7 p.m., like I have an alarm that goes off and then I start my list of nighttime routines. That looks like journaling my next day's priorities or mandatories, and then journaling some type of thought from the day or just from the week or something like that. And then we do some rib tacking. I mean, when I'm living right, I'm doing the rib tacking. I normally kind of
That's just like kind of flossing the ribs, right? Type thing, or
yeah, just kind of like doing some breathing and some like rib adjustments. And then I eat my last meal, shower, and then I'll either read or we'll watch like an anime or something to just chill out. And yeah, so at 7 a.m. I plug my phone in. I plug my phone in outside of the bedroom, so we don't have any electronics in the room.
I think that's huge.
It's
huge. I
huge.
try to mention it as much as possible, but I still don't think people listen enough to that.
Yeah,
It's just a small thing that you can do. It doesn't cost you anything.
I agree.
It might take you some time to get used to, but
yeah, I agree. I think the worst thing you can do is just be on bed and like scrolling through social media, like, and then put it down and then try to go right to
it's not
sleep.
very healthy for your relationship either, I don't think.
Oh,
Or if
definitely
you have
agree with
kids
that.
or whatever, yeah.
Definitely agree with that. Yeah. And I have an issue with social media too. Like I definitely have to like watch myself when I'm with Jake to make sure like we're having like quality time rather than just me being engulfed in consuming social media content all day long.
It's designed for us to be addicted to it. So
Yeah.
I don't think anybody blame you for that.
I'm part of that statistic for sure. There's one other thing I was going to say. I can't remember. Oh, blue light blocking glasses. Yeah. So right when I get out of the shower, I have my blue light blocking glasses on for the rest of the night. And those are all really the habitual things I can think of. But all of those, like, they all kind of sound like by themselves, they don't sound like, that groundbreaking. But really, when you put them all together, it's made a big change for me.
Yeah, and you do them often. We could sit here and like split hairs over certain things and say, oh, there's science that shows there's no difference. Your heart rate doesn't matter in accordance to like you eating carbs or something like that. But we can all agree that it's valuable to take a moment in the day and just to stop and just to pause everything that you're doing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that's like in debate. And I don't think that anybody would disagree with just having a moment where you put everything on pause just to be with yourself, just to be with your own thoughts, and you just relax.
To be mindful. Yeah.
All right. Strength is never a weakness. Weakness is never a strength. Catch you guys later. Bye.
All right, so we learned a ton of stuff about performance enhancing substances, we'll call it for right now, on today's episode. But one name that kept coming up was Andy Triana, aka Go Superbrain. Just did an amazing podcast with him talking about how you can really make caffeine work a whole lot better for everything that you're doing. So make sure you guys go check this out right now. Peace.